Jesús Reyes-Heroles, former Ambassador of Mexico to the U.S., 1997-2000. Ex embajador de México en Estados Unidos, 1997-2000.
Ambassador Reyes-Heroles, your period was the late 90s to the year 2000, 97 I think to the year 2000.
That's right.
Talk to me about some of the challenges that you faced.
Well, I think that there were two or three structural and two or three conjunctural. The structural were, of course, the growing number of Mexican nationals who had been migrated into the U.S. and they had settled down, and they were trying to settle down, and the point is that there were many conditions that were very unfavorable to that. I used to say at that time that I used to distinguish the economic absorption capacity of the U.S. economy in terms of giving jobs to a very significant number of Mexicans and the social rate of absorption. And I used to spend quite some time traveling and talking with governors and mayors and so on, precisely about the phenomenon of how to deal with this migration, which was economically indispensable for the U.S., and at the same time it required much better attention for having these people living better and gradually becoming more American and more accustomed to this society.
So give me a sense. I mean, you're talking about an increase in migration of how much?
Well, we used to basically, the numbers that we used to have at that time is that there were something in the neighborhood between 125 and 150,000 per year, and net. There has been always a lot of circular movements between the people come and then go back and they will come back and so on. That was more or less the net number that was used, which by the way was critically, it was also important for the Mexican economy to adjust its labor market. It was that valve, escape valve, that allowed the market to get tight and to move ahead. So there were, I remember a case one day, one of the consuls calls me and tells me, listen, I had just visited some of the farms in Georgia where the Mexicans were. I used to go frequently, and I had been 2 weeks before. And so he calls me and he said, well, we have a major problem because, the Border Patrol went into the farms, precisely the farms that we were visiting, and they came in to actually arrest the Mexicans who were actually it was a crop and they were raising that, and there were lots of people came out with shotguns and so on, and to confront the Border Patrol. And I said, who? The Mexican nationals? I say, no, the Americans that hired them, that they came out to protect them from the Border Patrol because they couldn't afford to lose them, and to precisely when they were actually harvesting.
That's amazing.
When they were harvesting. And I remember that I had been there. For example, there were places where they had the places where they slept. Let's say that in a room they had 12 beds or something, and their baths and their kitchen and their stuff, because they didn't like the local food, so they used to cook. So these bosses, they had a regular relationship for years. The same people used to come back a year later to do that. So that was the kind of process that was, it was, I would say, a mature migratory process occurring during that particular time. So that was one important.
So what happened? Oh, go ahead.
No. There were things like, for example, they were in some states they would, or in some cities, they were allowed to get a driving license. And in some others, they didn't. And you know that in the US, the driving license is a key document to actually be able to survive, I would say, no? And for different reasons, the legislatures or of the governments didn't allow in some places. So part of the quest was to explain the many positive things that were there in granting the Mexicans a driving license. And we in the consulates, remember that Mexico has the largest number of consulates, network of consulates in the world. We actually reached 50 at that time. I opened up a couple of them. And we speeded up the emission, of the granting of a special card that was had some security features and other things that would in turn be accepted by the governments to the U.S. Local governments to be able to grant the licenses, driving licenses, and that had impacts in terms of the insurances, in terms of accidents, many things, and. There was one activity that was really very important, and talking to them, talking to the migrants. The conditions of living were really, in some places, very, very poor. In the cities, for example, people who were working in the cities, they suddenly started getting together into trailer camps, and even in big trailers, they used to live there because the authorities, the local authorities, who hired them to do some jobs and some work, didn't provide them an adequate space for them to actually sleep and have and live, basically. So it was a continuous quest to actually make that happening in the benefit of both parts. No?
But there was a realization that they needed them.
Yes.
Maybe not welcome them greatly, but these were people who were wanted at the time.
They were wanted, they were needed, and the point is they were not adequately handled or managed. No? It was not a managed migration, it was a very disorderly migration because it got concentrated in certain points. So that it was something important, and there were more and more organizations that were being created or were born to actually defend the rights of our Mexican connationals. There was a continuous dialogue with them, figuring out what to do. Actually, what we were doing at that time is trying to figure out if we could, what would be the basic elements of a labor reform in the U.S. that would, not labor, a migratory reform in the U.S. And actually, we were able during that period to have a package that was ready just when the administration of the next president, in that case President Bush, who won the election, it was inaugurated. No, so with President Clinton, we had been working on that. We had been working with Congress. We had been working with the FAL-CIO. We had been working, for example, during that period, the FAL-CIO actually changed its position. Because it didn't accept Mexicans to become part of the rank and file, and they changed that. Because they saw that the newcomers, the new entrants into the labor market, not all, but many were of Mexican origin, and they actually changed that. No?
Looking back at can you identify the moment that you thought this is going to be a problem? Down the line in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, this is going to be a problem.
There was, I just talked to you about the positive aspects of it, but we had many problems in the border.
I mean, I'm talking about problems with the migration.
Problems with the migration. There were several things. There was the case of how the agents behaved in the border. That was complicated because there were in some cases they used excessive violence. And there were some very heraldic cases where the officials were accused of excessive violence, and actually the tribunals basically acquitted them. There were several before. There was one case where there was some slight signaling that against the official, which was very, very frustrating for everybody, for the community and for us as officials, Mexican officials. That was one. The other one, there were some shootings in the border, right? In the river, in the river or in the border. Always very, very complicated in that regard. There was a growing. The national groups were accommodating themselves, meaning, well, obviously there were the white Anglo-Saxon, and then there were the Black Americans and the Mexicans and then other nationalities, Haitians and so on. And there were growing clashes between these groups that, depending on the region of the United States, Louisiana, for example, was a very complicated place for Mexicans. Mm-hmm. And there were continuously clashes, or Mexicans were robbed by other groups when they were taking money out of an ATM or whatever, and the police was not precisely very receptive to attend the cases where the victims were of Mexican origin, no? So that was another thing. So there were other issues that required intervention of the authorities, and the conditions under which the Mexicans were captured in the border, and then they were brought to these stations where they spent a couple of times. How to deal with the women, how to deal with the kids. Right. We work out several protocols with the immigration authorities.
So mostly you still had single men. The what? Mostly you had single men.
Well, yes, the majority were single men.
And it started changing to more and more.
It started changing families. Into more families or women with children. Now that we're moving, at that time the commissioner of immigration commissioner was Doris Meissner, and she was a very intelligent lady and very open to new ideas about how to improve this complicated thing that we both had to deal with, and I visited frequently those facilities where they had our connationals arrested for a while the process worked out, and they were returned to Mexico, and we started with the process of pacific return to Mexico, repatriation to Mexico. So that there was intensity there, while it was paradoxical because you had friction at the border where obviously they were coming in without documents, and that is a violation of the law and so on. But at the same time, there was this huge economy up here demanding more and more arms, to work there. So that was an important thing. Then I don't want to spend too much time on that. The other important issue was that Mexico was during the second part of the administration of President Cedillo. You might remember that in 1997, in the midterm election, the PRI lost the elections in the House. So it lost the House. It lost also the government of Mexico City, right. And the PRD came in strongly, and that obviously was an indication that the PRI was losing space, and there were many initiatives, legal initiatives that they were in the pipeline during the administration of. I was Secretary of Energy before coming to Washington. And there were many initiatives that had to be postponed because it was impossible at that time to figure out to pass them with that different composition of the Congress. The PRI lost the majority. No?
What do you think was the key to making this orderly, peaceful transition
In Mexico?
In Mexico, but you as in the ambassador in Washington, I mean, your job was to keep everything pretty much to run smoothly.
Yes.
One to one. What was the key to doing that?
Well, actually, you know, it's curious, but that was one of the indications of President Cedillo when he sent me to Washington. The fact that his priorities were the election of the year 2000, that they had to be pacific, that, you know, the Mexican democracy was getting more and more profound, and that he wanted to concentrate in that. He had to make some legal changes and other things to have a specific democratic process in the year 2000. And therefore, in that regard, the relationship with the U.S. Actually was in a secondary position. It was not the priority. The priority was a democratic transition, and therefore just don't generate problems. I don't want problems with the U.S. during this period, because he had to work hard there. And there were some things that I had to do in regard to the political process in Mexico and the U.S., talk a lot about that. Everywhere they invited me, I went to speak about what was going on in Mexico and what could be expected, that there was a real democratic contest going on in Mexico,
right,
and anything could happen. The result could be any result. That people didn't believe that. I mean, it was like, you know, after 70 years of PRI governments, are you really saying that it is possible? There's a possibility that the PRI would not win the election. They didn't believe that. It happened. It was precisely during that election that the President Vicente Fox won the election, the National Action Party, and it was, you know, the first historic transition in Mexico for 70 years.
And you were part of it, and that had
well,
to be
I was on the outs from here. There were many things to do in Washington, and we used to bring frequent congressional delegations, co-dels, to Mexico, that they understood the process. The president and Mexico requested a lot of observers open up. Whoever wanted to be an observer of the election, they could go. So we have to work on that, organize that, talk with the people who wanted to or organizations who wanted to do that. That was really important, and obviously maintain an absolute neutrality from a political point of view. I mean, I used to receive in the U.S. Frequently. Candidate Fox did campaign in the U.S.
Right.
The other political parties did so too. Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas was everywhere, and I had given instructions, very clear instructions, to our consuls and consul generals in the U.S. that they had to help them. When I knew that they were, I only asked them, please let us know when you're coming so that we can give you the properly attention, which meant maybe sending somebody to the airport to pick them up. If they needed and we had a car, we could lend them a car if they wanted. We didn't want to push, because there was also a lot of suspicion on the other side. Right. They thought that if we were going to actually, lend them a car or a driver or somebody, we wanted to spy them or something like that. I mean, some of these candidates I knew from before, and it was really a very interesting situation, no? And that's what we did. And they gradually recognized that the way we dealt with that was a professional way. And that they came to Washington, they came to the main cities. Chicago was obviously Los Angeles, and other places. And these frequent visits always created the risks of something getting out of order. Right. No, the media, sometimes the media was not attentive enough with our candidates, and stuff like that. That always happens in big processes like that. And then the other thing is, obviously, there was the political year in the U.S. and we had to be
you talk about Bush versus Gore.
Bush and Gore, yeah, and we had to be very careful in following that, and obviously not taking sides. We had a very good relationship with the government of President Clinton and with President Gore. You will remember that President Clinton actually helped out. He started with pushing forward the bailout, authorizing the bailout of Mexico, financially speaking, which regretfully the government of President Cedillo started in a very difficult condition, and that bailout was very important. So the attitude of President Clinton, the just elected President Clinton, just inaugurated, and was very conducive to initiate a good relationship between the two presidents and the two countries. So we had a very good relationship with them, but at the same time, Governor Bush had been for years, always, I would say, very close to Mexico.
Right.
I mean, he used to travel in a personal basis. He used to travel as governor of Texas. He used to invite people to Texas, from the northern states or from other places. I used to visit him frequently. We had we organized the mechanics was that we picked a topic of the relationship between Texas and Mexico, and then let's say health, and then we had some people from Mexico came to Austin. And I flew down from Washington, and we had an interview with him. Then we had a meeting where there was presentations on both sides. What are the issues? What are the things that are being done between the two the state government and Mexico, or the government of the neighboring state to the south? And after that, we had it was lunch in the mansion with his wife, with Tony Garza, by the way, was always there, and we did that regularly and frequently because there are an extraordinary number of issues between Texas and Mexico. So there was already a relationship, and Governor Bush used to help us in many things. Remember that at that time Mexico was subject to that horrendous and completely counterproductive process of certification.
Right.
That every year a report had to be sent by the administration to the Congress, and the Congress had to discuss it and to actually make a judgment if Mexico was doing enough or not.
Right.
In terms of cooperating with the U.S. in the fight against drug trafficking. An absurd procedure, an absurd thing that created humongous tensions between the two countries. It was very seasonal.
Very volatile.
Yeah, in November, and the members of the House came out to bash Mexico and of the Congress in general, and some others came out to defend. And in that discussions, yearly discussion, the governors of the border were very important because they understood the relationship with Mexico much better than anybody else, no? And the contact, they had a lot of contact, the people and the people of Mexico and so on. And President Bush had always been very committed. So this is just to say that it was extremely important for us, for Mexico, to be perceived, and not only perceived, but to be completely neutral in regard to the succession in the U.S. So we had presidential elections in Mexico concurrent with the presidential election in the United States. So there were a lot of politics, let me put it that way.
Fascinating period.
A fascinating period, very interesting, and I don't regret it at all.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
No, thank you.
Reyes-Heroles.
Thank you.